The moon hung low over Castle Ardent, its pale light spilling through tall windows and across silver dishes. The hall was quiet, too quiet, except for the clinking of goblets and the whisper of servants moving like ghosts. Among them was Elena Voss, the youngest maid in the royal staff. She kept her head down, hands trembling slightly as she poured crimson wine into the king's glass. The color reminded her of things she wished to forget. At the head of the table sat Lucien Ardent, the vampire king. He rarely spoke, rarely blinked. His presence alone commanded silence. When he did speak, it was like hearing stones shift beneath water. Every noble in the room straightened, every servant held their breath. Elena had never looked directly at him before. But tonight, when she reached for his glass, her sleeve slipped back. The candlelight caught the edge of her wrist and the bruises blooming beneath her skin. For a second, time stopped. Lucien's eyes, silver, unreadable, lingered there, just long enough for her to notice. She snatched her hand back, whispering, "Forgive me, Your Majesty." The glass slipped from her grasp and shattered against the marble. Every head turned toward her. One of the older maids gasped. A nobleman sneered. The steward stepped forward, ready to drag her away for punishment. But Lucien raised a single hand. Silence fell instantly. He looked at Elena, not with anger, not even curiosity, but something far more dangerous: attention. His voice was calm, low, resonant. "Leave it." The steward froze. "Sire," I said, "leave it." Lucien's gaze didn't move from the girl. The others watched. Bewildered, the king never interfered in matters this small. Then, softly, he added, "You've suffered enough for one mistake." The words hung in the air like a blade suspended between two worlds. Elena's eyes widened, not from fear, but confusion. She bowed quickly, gathering the shards, and fled from the hall, her pulse echoing louder than the footsteps behind her. When the doors closed, the nobles murmured, exchanging puzzled glances. The steward dared to whisper, "Your Majesty, mercy does not suit our kind." Lucien leaned back, his gaze fixed on the dark wine rippling in his untouched glass. "Then perhaps our kind no longer suits me." The table fell silent again. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, and somewhere down the servants' corridor, a young woman pressed her hand against her chest, wondering why a single sentence from her king felt like the first breath she'd taken in years. The storm lasted 3 nights. By the 4th, the castle had grown restless. Servants moved in hushed tones, the nobles whispered in corridors, and even the torches seemed to burn lower when Lucien Ardent entered a room. No one could explain it, but everyone felt it. Something had shifted since that dinner. The king's silence, once heavy and distant, now carried weight of a different kind. He no longer read during his evening meals, no longer dismissed the servants without looking at them. He listened. He watched. And always, his eyes found Elena Voss. She avoided him as best she could, but the castle was a maze, and Lucien's presence was everywhere. When she swept the grand hall, she felt it. When she passed through the garden, she sensed it. Not the menace of a predator, but the awareness of someone who noticed too much. One afternoon, as she polished the silver candelabras, she overheard 2 footmen talking near the servants' entrance. "Her husband's come again," one whispered. "The drunk?" "The same," asked for coin. The steward gave him none. He said she owes him her wages. "She owes him nothing," the other muttered, "but if he leaves without gold, he'll take it out on her skin." Elena froze, the cloth slipping from her hand. They noticed too late. "Miss Voss, we didn't mean." She shook her head quickly. "You said nothing wrong." But her voice was hollow, like something inside her had turned to glass. That night, Lucien sat alone in the library, the air thick with candle smoke and rain. He should have been reading. Instead, he listened. Every heart in the castle beat within his reach, and yet one rhythm drew him more than any other, faint, unsteady, carrying sorrow instead of fear. He didn't need to see her to know what she felt. He had heard that sound before, long ago, the quiet heartbeat of someone trying not to cry. A servant entered timidly. "Your Majesty, there's word from the lower gate. A man waits outside, says he's here for his wife." Lucien's gaze lifted from the page. "His wife?" "Yes, sire. A maid named Elena." The king closed the book gently. "Let him wait." The servant hesitated. "He insists, Your Majesty." Lucien stood. "No man who insists on cruelty deserves an audience. See that he leaves with his life intact." The servant bowed low. "Yes, sire." But Lucien didn't sit again. He walked to the window, watching the storm gather once more beyond the mountains. Lightning flashed, and for a brief moment, his reflection appeared in the glass eyes, not silver, but faintly red, the color of rage, carefully contained. Down in the servant's wing, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She'd heard the thunder. She'd felt it shake through the walls. But beneath it, she could swear she'd heard something else, the echo of a heartbeat that wasn't hers, steady and protective, calling her name from somewhere in the dark. The rain had turned the gardens into a world of silver and glass, every leaf glistening, every petal trembling under the weight of water. Most of the castle slept, lulled by the storm. But not Elena Voss. She walked barefoot through the courtyard, her thin cloak soaked through, the cold biting at her skin. She didn't know why she had come outside, maybe, to feel something that wasn't fear. Maybe to breathe without listening for footsteps behind her. When she reached the marble fountain at the garden center, she sank to her knees. The water mirrored her face, pale, hollow-eyed, streaked with rain and tears alike. She pressed her hand to the bruise on her wrist, whispering to no one, "Just one more day. I can survive one more day." But the lie trembled as it left her lips. A low voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't lie to yourself, Elena." She startled, turning sharply. Lucien Ardent stood a few steps behind her, the rain gliding off his dark coat as if afraid to touch him. His hair clung to his temples, his eyes glowing faintly beneath the stormlight silver, catching every drop. She rose quickly, bowing. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. I didn't know." "You didn't know I walk my gardens at night?" His tone was soft, but it wasn't a question. He stepped closer. The air grew colder, but his voice remained calm. "You've been weeping. Why?" Elena's lips parted, but no sound came. She looked away, gripping her cloak. "It's nothing, sire. The rain hides tears well enough." "Not from me." She froze. His words weren't stern, they were quiet, almost gentle. He moved closer, until only the fountain stood between them. "Tell me, Elena, who gave you those bruises?" Her breath caught. "I fell." Lucien's gaze darkened. "You are human, not fragile glass. No fall leaves a mark shaped like fingers." She trembled, stepping back. "Please, don't ask me this." "Then tell me what you want me to ask." His voice had changed, not cold now, not royal, just human. It made something inside her crack. Tears welled again, spilling faster this time. "He's all I have," she whispered, "and when he drinks, he forgets I'm not something to strike." Lucien's hands clenched at his sides. The rain hissed louder, as though reacting to his anger. "You call that having someone?" She shook her head. "It's better than being alone." "No." He took another step, his presence wrapping around her like the storm itself. "Alone is survival. What he gives you is death by inches." Elena wiped her tears, voice shaking. "Why do you care?" Lucien hesitated. The question pierced deeper than she knew. He looked away, as if the truth might break him. "Because centuries ago, someone asked me the same thing, and I didn't answer in time." The silence that followed was heavy, charged with something neither could name. Then he said, softly, "Go inside, Elena. You'll freeze." She hesitated. "Yes, Your Majesty." When she turned to leave, he added almost to himself, but loud enough for her to hear, "You won't be alone again." As she disappeared into the corridors, Lucien stood motionless in the rain. Water streamed down his face, but his eyes were dry, shining faintly with a light that hadn't been there in centuries. And above the thunder, he whispered into the storm, "If he hurts her again, I will remember what it means to be a king." The next evening, the castle buzzed with low tension, a current running beneath the polished marble and candlelight. Word had spread quickly. A man had arrived at the gates, shouting the king's name and demanding his wife. By the time Lucien Ardent entered the great hall, Gregor Voss was already there, soaked in rain and arrogance, smelling of cheap wine and smoke. He bowed without respect, his movements clumsy and defiant. The guards flanked him, uncertain. No mortal had ever spoken so boldly under the king's roof. Lucien's steps echoed across the chamber. He stopped a few feet away, his presence alone enough to silence every sound in the room. "Who dares disturb my court at this hour?" Gregor raised his chin. "A husband, your majesty." His voice was hoarse but loud, the kind of courage only liquor lends. "I've come for my wife, the maid Elena. She belongs to me." The words hung in the air like poison. Every noble in the hall shifted, horrified yet curious. Lucien's gaze didn't waver. He studied the man, the trembling hands, the swollen lip, the scent of anger hiding behind fear. "Belongs," Lucien repeated softly, as if tasting the word. Gregor mistook calm for weakness. "She's my wife. She took vows before men and God alike. You keep her here like some pet, and I demand—" The rest of his sentence was swallowed by silence. Lucien hadn't moved. He didn't need to. The temperature dropped, breath turning to mist. His voice came quiet, and even, the kind of tone that made the bravest soldiers kneel. "You demand nothing in my hall." Gregor stumbled, trying to recover. "You think you can take her from me? You don't know what she's like, what she's done." Lucien's expression didn't change, but his eyes flickered silver, igniting with something darker beneath. "I know she's afraid to breathe in her own home. That is all I need to know." The court fell utterly still. Gregor's bravado faltered. "She's mine." Lucien stepped forward once, and the torches dimmed. "Then you should not have broken what you claim to own." That sentence was enough. The guards seized Gregor by the arms, dragging him backward as he shouted curses that echoed uselessly through the hall. When he was gone, Lucien turned to his steward. "Ensure he leaves these lands by dawn." The steward bowed. "And if he returns, sire?" Lucien's gaze hardened, his voice little more than a whisper. "Then make sure he doesn't." After the hall emptied, Lady Marin, his oldest counselor, remained behind. "You risk much for a human," she murmured. "Compassion is a language our kind forgets easily." Lucien stared at the empty doorway where Gregor had stood. "Perhaps it's time we remember." Marin tilted her head. "Do you pity her, or do you envy her?" He didn't answer. But when he looked toward the far corridor, the one that led to the servants' quarters, there was something raw, almost human, in his expression. That night, Elena didn't sleep. She heard the shouts from the hall, the echo of boots against marble. And though she couldn't make out the words, she recognized the voice that had silenced them all, deep, calm, final. When dawn came, she went to the window. The rain had stopped. The world outside looked clean, but in the distance, she saw footprints leading away from the gate, and somehow, she knew she'd never hear her husband's voice again. Dawn came pale and soundless over Castle Ardent, brushing the stone towers in shades of gray. Lucien stood alone in the upper corridor, staring at the mountains half hidden by mist. He hadn't moved since the night before. The court had gone back to sleep. Relieved, the outburst was over. Only Lucien knew it wasn't. Somewhere beyond those clouds, Gregor Voss still breathed. For now, he pressed a hand against the cold window pane, the reflection that met his eyes, more ghost than man. Centuries of control had carved his face into marble. Centuries of distance had turned his heart to glass. And yet a single human woman had managed to crack both. Behind him, a voice intruded softly. "Lady Marin." "Your Majesty," she said, bowing. "He's been released from the valley, as you ordered." Lucien didn't turn. "And the guards?" "They'll ensure he never crosses your border again." A pause. Marin hesitated, then stepped closer. "You could have killed him last night. The court expected you to, but you let him live." Lucien's tone was flat. "For now." Her eyes narrowed. "Mercy from you is rarer than daylight. What changed?" He faced her then, and for the first time in years, she saw the fracture behind the mask. "She did." Marin studied him. "The maid." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later, when the sun dipped low, Lucien found himself walking the servants' corridor, a place no king belonged. The air smelled of soap, of linen, of life untouched by ambition. And somewhere behind one of those doors, he heard her heartbeat steady, fragile, human. He stopped outside her room but didn't knock. His hand hovered over the door, unsure what he would say if she opened it. Would he tell her the truth, that the man who had haunted her was gone? Would he admit that the darkness she feared now obeyed his will? Instead, he whispered to the door itself, "Sleep, Elena. Let me bear what you cannot." Then he turned away, the weight of centuries pressing heavier than armor. That night, he stood before the throne not as a ruler, but as a man at war with himself. The hall was empty. The candles burned low. He stared at the seat that had defined his existence and felt nothing but exhaustion. For the first time, he spoke aloud to the shadows. What is a king who cannot protect what is his? No answer came, only the echo of his own words. He drew a breath, slow and deliberate, then said quietly, "By sunrise, he breathes no more." The decision fell like a blade through silence. Outside, the wind howled across the mountains, carrying the first scent of snow. The guards who heard the command did not question it. When the king's will moved, the night obeyed. And somewhere in the valley below, Gregor Voss awoke to footsteps in the dark. A warning too late, a justice too cold, and a promise finally kept. The night fell like a curtain, heavy and absolute. Every flame in Castle Ardent burned lower than usual, as if the air itself had been warned to stay still. The servants spoke in whispers, sensing what no one dared name, that the king's patience had finally ended. From the upper balcony, Lucien Ardent watched the mist roll over the valley. Below, the forest stretched black and endless, swallowing sound. Somewhere in that darkness, a single heartbeat pulsed the man who had hurt Elena Voss, still alive against the king's decree. Lucien closed his eyes. He didn't need to summon his guards. His power had always obeyed silence better than words. "Find him," he murmured. "Let no scream reach the dawn." The wind shifted, the torches flickered out, and from the shadows beneath the courtyard arches, dark shapes stirred, not men, not beasts, but something between both. The sentries of the bloodline, bound to Lucien's will since the old wars, rose after centuries of sleep. Their eyes glowed faintly silver as they slipped into the fog, noiseless and certain. Down in the servants' wing, Elena lay awake. She had dreamed of footsteps heavy, deliberate, and awoke to the echo of real ones fading beyond her door. For reasons she couldn't explain, her chest tightened with dread. Not for herself, but for the man she had once loved and feared in equal measure. She stood, wrapped her shawl tighter, and peered through the narrow window. The forest below the castle flickered with movement, faint glimmers, like eyes catching moonlight. And in the distance, she thought she heard something like wings. Hours passed before the quiet returned. The first hint of dawn crept through the mist, painting the valley in silver. Elena hadn't slept. She sat at the edge of her bed, listening. Then, from the corridor outside, She heard footsteps measured, echoing, too calm for any human. When the door opened, Lucien stood there, still in his black coat, untouched by the storm or time. He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. She rose slowly. "Your Majesty? He won't trouble you again." Her breath caught. She wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his tone told her she already knew. You did this?" Lucien's gaze flickered toward the window. "I kept my promise." She stepped closer. "You said you wouldn't." "No," he interrupted softly. "I said I wouldn't let him live as he was." Her heart pounded. "And now?" He met her eyes, voice barely a whisper. "Now he rests." Elena pressed a hand to her chest, torn between relief and terror. "You killed for me." Lucien shook his head slowly. "I judged for you." The words struck her harder than she expected. He wasn't proud, he sounded weary, as if centuries of blood had finally begun to weigh on him. Outside, the sun finally broke over the mountains, staining the castle in gold. Elena looked toward the light, then back at him. "You shouldn't have," she whispered. Lucien's answer was almost tender. "Then you shouldn't have made me remember what mercy feels like." He turned to leave, the dawn catching on the edge of his coat like a flame about to die. And for the first time since she'd met him, she saw not a king or a monster, but a man who had just given up a piece of eternity for her peace. The sun rose reluctantly, spilling pale light through the stained glass windows of Castle Ardent. Its colors touched the marble floors, soft and warm, but warmth was the last thing the castle felt. Every servant, every noble, every guest moved with the caution of someone walking through a dream they feared to wake from. The rumor had already spread. The maid's husband was gone. No one knew how, or dared to ask. Elena Voss moved through the hallways with eyes lowered, the weight of whispers following her like a shadow. No one spoke to her directly, but when she passed, the silence thickened. She could feel the question behind every stare. What did she mean to the king? She tried to ignore it, focusing on her work, polishing silver that reflected faces she didn't want to see. But when the steward approached, his usual cruelty was gone. He only said, "The king requests your presence in the East Garden." Her hands froze mid-motion. "The garden?" He nodded quickly, eyes averted. "Now, if you please." The path to the garden was quiet, except for birdsong and the distant hum of wind. The storm had washed everything clean. Even the roses seemed to stand taller. And there, beneath the weeping willow, stood Lucien Ardent. He wasn't in his usual attire of ceremony or armor. Just a simple black coat, unbuttoned at the collar, his hair undone by the breeze. For the first time, he looked less like a king and more like the echo of a man. When she approached, he turned slowly, the faintest trace of a smile, fragile, uncertain, brushing his lips. "You came." Elena hesitated. "I didn't think I could refuse." "You couldn't," he said simply, "but you didn't want to." She opened her mouth, closed it again. "Everyone knows, don't they?" Lucien nodded once. "They know enough to stay silent." Her voice wavered. "They think I asked you to do it." "Did you?" She met his gaze. "No, but you did it anyway." He stepped closer, the air between them tightening. "I did what needed to be done. For me? For what's right. You call that right? I call it balance." Her breath caught. "You had no right to decide that." Lucien's expression shifted, not anger, not regret, but something in between. "No, I had no right to care either. But here we are." The words broke something inside her. She turned away, tears threatening again. "I didn't want this." "I know," he said softly, "but I wanted peace for you, and I've never wanted anything selfless in my life." They stood in silence, the garden wind whispering around them. Finally, she said, "I should hate you." Lucien's reply was quiet, almost reverent. Then hate me, Elena, but don't think I'll stop watching over you. She turned, meeting his eyes, that silver light soft now, like moonlight through fog. I don't hate you, she whispered. That's what frightens me. When she left, Lucien remained beneath the willow. The scent of rain lingered in the air. And though the castle was alive again with gossip and tension, none dared look out the window to see their king standing alone in the morning sun, learning, perhaps for the first time, how much it hurt to be human again. Night fell softly over Castle Ardent, wrapping the towers in silver mist. The moon rose pale and perfect, reflected in every window like an eye watching the quiet. Servants retired early, afraid of crossing the king's path, afraid of what his silence meant now. But Elena Voss couldn't sleep. Her heart refused to rest, beating against her chest like it wanted to speak before she did. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face beneath the willow, calm, unreadable, yet haunted. She remembered the way his voice had trembled, not with anger, but with something far rarer for a man like him, remorse. And before she could stop herself, she was already moving. The corridors were empty, the torches low. Her bare feet made no sound against the marble as she climbed the stairwell toward the east wing, the part of the castle few servants ever entered. At the top stood 2 doors of black oak, carved with symbols that whispered of older times. She hesitated. Then she knocked once. The door opened before her knuckles touched it again. Lucien Ardent stood there, awake, dressed simply, as though he had been expecting her. The candlelight painted his features in gold, and shadow beautiful, but distant, like a memory that refused to fade. Elena, he said softly. She bowed her head. Forgive me, I shouldn't have come. And yet you did. Her breath trembled. I can't stop thinking about it. About him. About you. Lucien stepped aside. Then, say what you came to say. She entered slowly, the air cooler here, filled with the faint scent of old books and cedar. A single candle burned on his desk. She stood before it, her reflection flickering in the glass. You took his life, she said quietly, and all I can feel is relief. Lucien watched her carefully. You think that makes you cruel? She shook her head. It makes me honest. He moved closer, his shadow falling across hers. Truth rarely comforts, but it frees. Her eyes filled with tears. I should hate you for what you've done. Then why don't you? Because you did what I wished someone would, but didn't dare to say aloud. Lucien's voice dropped, softer now, as though afraid to disturb the air between them. You think I wanted to kill him? Didn't you? No. He stepped closer still, until the candlelight trembled between them. I wanted to save you, and I don't know what that makes me anymore. Her breath caught. It makes you kind. He laughed, quiet, bitter, almost human. Kindness doesn't suit kings, Elena. We're made of cruelty and regret, and yet. He stopped himself, eyes flicking to her lips. The silence stretched, heavy, fragile. She whispered, and yet what? Lucien's answer was barely audible. And yet, every time I hear your heart, I remember what it was to have one. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her hand rose slowly, resting against his chest where, beneath the stillness, a faint rhythm pulsed. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting her warmth pierce the centuries of cold. Then, with a voice that trembled more than it should have, he said, If you stay, you'll lose the life you know. Elena met his gaze. Then let me lose it. He stepped back, shaking his head. You don't understand what you're asking. I'm not asking, she whispered. I'm choosing. Lucien stared at her, and for the first time, he looked afraid not of the council, not of the curse, but of hope. Then, quietly, he said, You don't belong in the dark. Elena's answer was simple. Then bring the light with you. Outside, the moon slipped free of the clouds. bathing them both in silver. Lucienne didn't move again, not toward or away, trapped between desire and restraint, between what he was and what she saw in him. But when she turned to leave, he whispered her name, and that single word carried every confession he couldn't yet speak aloud. By morning, the whispers had already grown teeth. Servants spoke in corners, their voices trembling with fear and curiosity. Someone had seen the maid leaving the king's chambers before dawn. Someone else swore they had heard her name spoken softly in his sleep. And by noon, the rumor was no longer a rumor. It was legend. Lucien Ardent sat in the council chamber, the light from the tall windows cutting across the marble like blades. The air was colder than usual. Around him, his advisors waited in uneasy silence, the kind that meant no one wanted to speak first. Finally, Lady Marin stepped forward. Her voice was careful, each word chosen like a knife placed on velvet. "Your Majesty, the court is unsettled." Lucien didn't look up. When has it ever been otherwise? This time, it concerns you. He closed the book in his hands, slowly. "Say it plainly. They say you've taken a mortal to your bed." The room froze. Even the torches seemed to hold their breath. Lucien's eyes lifted then, silver and sharp. "They say much to fill the silence of their small lives." "Perhaps," Marin said, steady but grave, "but the Council of Blood won't ignore it. They've tolerated your restraint because it kept peace. If they believe you've attached yourself to a human, they'll call it weakness." She hesitated. "They'll call it treason." Lucien rose, the movement deliberate, quiet, but enough to make every heart in the room stutter. He walked to the window, gazing out over the courtyard below. Elena was there, hanging linens, her head bent against the wind. The light caught in her hair, warm, alive, human. For a moment, it looked like sunlight dared to love her. "Let them come," he said finally. "Let them call it what they will." Marin's voice dropped. "You would risk your throne for her?" He turned, eyes glinting faintly. "I'd risk the throne to remember why it mattered in the first place." By dusk, the castle was restless. The nobles watched him with awe and terror. No one approached the king's table. Even the guards avoided his eyes. Elena noticed it too. When she entered the great hall to serve the evening meal, every whisper stopped. The silence was louder than thunder. Lucien's gaze met hers across the room. For a moment, neither moved. Then he said, calmly, but with the weight of command, "Leave us." The nobles exchanged uncertain glances, but obeyed. When the hall was empty, Elena approached. "They're afraid of you," she said quietly. "They should be." "And me?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "They envy you." Her lips parted. "For what?" "For being seen." The sound of wind swept through the open windows. Somewhere far below, a bell rang the hour. Elena took a step closer. "They'll come for you, won't they? The council." "Yes." "Then what happens to me?" Lucien's voice softened, a thread of iron wrapped in silk. "If they touch you, the peace between our worlds ends." "You'd start a war for me?" "No," he said, and for once, he smiled faint, sad, and entirely human. "I'd end one." That night, as torches burned low, the castle slept in fear. And in the silence between heartbeats, messengers rode through the mountains, carrying word to the immortal court. "The king has chosen a human." The summons came with the dawn. A raven at the window, black against the pale morning sky, bearing the seal of the Council of Blood, crimson wax, pressed with the mark of judgment. The message was brief. "You have forgotten what you are. Return to the old ways, or fall with the mortal you protect." Lucien burned it without a word. The flame caught easily, but it smelled of iron and old dust, like history trying to rewrite itself. By midday, the castle gates thundered open. 12 riders entered, cloaked in the dark of centuries, their armor gleaming faintly like the surface of a coffin. They didn't ask permission to dismount. They never did. From the balcony above, Lucien Ardent watched them gather. At his side stood Elena Voss, her face pale, her hands clenched to keep them from trembling. "They're here for me," she whispered. Lucien's voice was steady. "They're here for us." She looked up at him, tears burning behind her eyes. "You can still send me away. Deny it. Tell them I mean nothing." He smiled faintly, tired, almost amused. "If only you did." The great hall was silent when the council entered. They moved like shadows, their eyes reflecting torchlight, their presence bending the air around them. At their head was Lord Saren, the eldest among them, his voice sharp as winter. "We warned you, Ardent. The crown is not a lover's gift. You rule by blood, not by heart." Lucien descended the dais slowly, his coat whispering across the marble. "I ruled by silence for centuries. It brought peace, not life. You've endangered everything. You've weakened our kind." "No," Lucien said softly. "I've remembered what strength is." Saren's gaze flicked toward Elena. "A fragile thing to risk eternity for." Lucien's tone hardened. "She is not fragile. She's the only thing in this room that's still alive." The counselors shifted, murmuring. Saren raised a hand. "Then let us see what your mercy costs." He moved toward Elena. Lucien's eyes flared silver. "Don't. You would defy us for her?" "I would defy eternity itself." And then the hall erupted, wind, flame, and darkness colliding. Lucien moved faster than sight. The torches burst, the glass shattered, and shadows fled before him. The counselors stumbled back, faces twisting with fury and awe. When silence returned, Saren lay on the floor, uninjured, but trembling, his power broken, his pride bleeding unseen. Lucien's voice carried through the ruin. "I am still your king, but I will not be your monster." The council left before nightfall. No one saw them ride away, but the whispers said their eyes no longer glowed as brightly. Lucien found Elena in the garden again, beneath the same willow where it had all begun. The world smelled of rain and freedom. "You could have killed them," she said. "I could have," he replied. "But then I'd be proving them right." She stepped closer. "What happens now?" "Now?" He smiled faintly. "Now we live, whatever that means." They stood there as the first drops of rain began to fall, light as breath. Elena looked up at him, at the man who had defied his own kind for her, and whispered, "You'll lose your crown." Lucien brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, his touch careful, reverent. "Then I'll wear a smaller one." The storm broke, but neither moved. Somewhere far below, the servants whispered of miracles and ruin. The vampire king had shown mercy, and in doing so, he had changed the world. And when dawn returned, they stood together in its light. A creature of night, a woman of day, and the fragile, impossible love that taught a king how to be human again.